This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, hello there. It's Jeff Carter. I'm welcoming you to another Sports Catastrophe on this day. And on this day, June the 9th, 1993, a moment in Canadian history as Canada captures a Stanley Cup. During the 100th anniversary of the Stanley Cup, yawn, you may be thinking, a Canadian team win the Stanley Cup. But that's the last time a Canadian team has won a Stanley Cup. It's been 28 long frickin' years and frustration and all that. I'll probably be doing a bonus video on the curse of the Canadian teams not getting to the Stanley Cup. Anyway, basically put, the Montreal Canadiens in 1993 came back from bad stuff and all that. Anyway, the 1993 Stanley Cup playoffs were huge. Not only did the Habs win the Stanley Cup, of course the last time a Canadian team done it, it actually, this playoff series had 28 overtime games, which is the record. 2017 was close with 27. If only one game in the finals went to overtime, then that would have tied the record, but no. The Habs ended up winning 10 of those 28 overtime games. And they won 11 straight games, which actually, not overtime, but like normal games, which tied the NHL record that was set by both the 92 Penguins and the 92 Blackhawks. You may be thinking, how is that possible? Well, the 92 Blackhawks were on 2-1 in the first round to the St. Louis Blues. They ended up winning the last 3 of that series. They swept Detroit in the division finals, and then they swept Edmonton in the conference finals and lost Game 1 of the Stanley Cup to the Penguins, who, with their 11-game streak, they actually were down 2-1 in the second round to the New York Rangers, won the last 3, then swept Boston in the conference finals, then swept the Blackhawks in the playoffs, which was weird. And then Montreal's 11 straight. Well, Montreal beat Quebec the final for 4 games. Yeah, they beat Quebec for 4 straight after being down 11-2 in the first round. Then in the second round, they swept Buffalo. Then they took care of the Islanders in the first 3 games of the conference finals, but lost Game 4 on Long Island, so that streak ended. Anyway, the Penguins were heavily favored to win their 3rd straight Stanley Cup, and who would blame them? I mean, they had that big 16-game winning streak at the end of the year. So, I mean, honestly, who would bet against them? However, 93 was also known for the year of the upset, as no 1 or 2 seed within the division actually got to the conference finals. All 4 conference finalists were the 3rd best team in their division, which was weird. But anyway, what's even more weird is that Edmonton missed the playoffs for the first time since 1979 with the merger from WHA to the NHL. Mark Messier missed the playoffs for the first time in his career. And for the only time between 1984 and 1994, Boston and Montreal didn't meet in the playoffs. They could have if Boston had managed to take care of Buffalo in the first round. So let's talk about the playoff and all that. In the Adams division, Boston was the top-seeded team, taking on number 4 Buffalo. Everyone thought that Boston could easily do it. I mean, after all, they were the 2nd-best team in the NHL, and the Sabres did not have all those points. However, Buffalo shocked everyone by winning 3 of their 4 games in the sweep in overtime. First by Bob Sweeney, who was a former Bruin, of all things. Game 3 was erroneously given to Dale Hawerchuk, the overtime goal, but it was Yuri Himilev. And of course, Game 4, who can forget the Brad May goal described by Rick Shenron over the radio? Mayday, 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 Brad May wins in overtime. They beat the Bruins. Next up, the Belle Provence. Oh, how do you spell second round? So it was shocking and all that. And for the first time in 10 years, Buffalo actually won a playoff series. The other matchup in the Adams was Quebec versus Montreal in the final battle of Quebec in the postseason. This was the 5th playoff series between the 2 teams. Kind of a tiebreaker, if you will. And weird as it sounds, this was the first playoff series between Quebec and Montreal for 6 years. Mostly because Quebec fell off a cliff, if you will. Quebec made one of the biggest point comebacks in history, scoring more than 50 points above their 1992 total for the 1993 thing. So anyway, it was huge. Montreal went into Quebec City, lost game 1 in overtime, and then lost game 2. So they were down love 2, and there were rumors circulating that Andre Red Light Rasico was going to be in net for Montreal and all of that. Nordique's goalie coach and Patrick Roy's idol, Dan Bouchard, said that they sought Roy. However, Jacques Demers basically said that I'm going to keep Roy no matter what, and all that. Game 3 in overtime, Montreal won on a goal by, I forget who scored the goal in Game 3. Jeff Dunn. But anyway, it was Vincent Damphousse who scored the goal. Hextall was mad. Hextall was traded from Philly to Quebec in the 92 offseason in the Lindros deal. But basically, he was mad that he thought that someone kicked it in. But no, it went off the skate of the Quebec defenseman. So basically, goal counts. Montreal won Game 4, and then Kirk Muller won a Game 5 in Quebec City to get to Game 6. And Gilbert Dion, Kitchener, did pretty well for himself. But let's not forget that it's Paul DiPietro with the hat trick to win the game 6-2. Paul DiPietro would actually be a hated part of Canada. Canadians would hate him 13 years later when, as a Swiss player in the Olympics, he sunk Canada. Pittsburgh would face New Jersey in the Patrick division. Number 1, Pittsburgh gets them for New Jersey. Everyone thought, oh, that was easy. Pittsburgh ended up losing Game 4 to the Devils. So they almost had a sweep. But, it didn't matter. All that. But the Penguins were happy. Also in the Patrick division, you had Washington versus the Islanders. This was the first time that they faced each other in the playoff series since the Easter epic in 1987. The Islanders used 3 straight overtime goals. What should have been 3 straight overtime goals by Ray Ferraro, which would have been heroic. But unfortunately, one of them was credited to Brian Mullen somehow. In Game 6, the Islanders beat the Caps. But the big story was after the Islanders seemingly sinked the Caps, Pierre Turgeon scored a big goal. But Dale Hunter made a body check way after the goal was scored. And all that. Turgeon had a separated shoulder and basically was out for the second round against Pittsburgh. Dale Hunter was given a 21-game suspension, or basically 1 quarter of the NHL season, because back in 94, there was 84 games for a regular season, not 82 like we do now. And the Oilers finally won a playoff series for the first time in 6 years. Since that thing against Washington. In the Campbell Conference in the North, the Blackhawks took on the Blues, number 1 versus number 4. Everyone thought the Blackhawks had it in the bag. I mean, they always are perennial contenders for getting to the Stanley Cup Finals. And they were the defending conference champion. Well, unfortunately, St. Louis had a different opinion, as Curtis Joseph, before he was a Leaf, and before he was an Oiler legend, basically stood on his head for the 93 Blues. Shockingly, getting 2 shutouts against the Blackhawks, that's one thing, but for the Blues to sweep the Blackhawks in 4 straight was another thing. Now, Game 4's overtime goal was controversial after Brett Hull kind of interfered with him on the play. But I think that they said that because Belfour was out of the crease and behind the net, he was fair game and all that. Basically, he was angry and all that after the game. Well, I would be too. But anyway, Ed Belfour and the Blackhawks shockingly got swept. So yeah, so another division champ got swept. Not only that, but Dwayne Sutter. I think it was Dwayne Sutter who was the coach of the Blackhawks because Keenan left. Basically, him and his brother Brian Sutter, who was the Bruins head coach. No, it's Daryl Sutter and his brother Brian. Both were the coaches for Boston and Chicago. The Senators were 0-8. Can you believe that? So anyway, the other North Division matchup had Detroit versus Toronto. This was the 23rd time they met in the playoffs. Their original 6, so why not? They split their prior 22 meetings in the playoffs. Wow. And Detroit was one of the most recent in 6 games in 1988. So anyway, it was heated. Detroit was up 2-0 on home ice. Toronto won the next 2 at home at Maple Leaf Gardens. And then in Game 5, Mike Foligno, scored the overtime goal in Detroit. Detroit shocked Toronto by winning 7-3 in Game 6 at Maple Leaf Gardens, which forced a Game 7 on May 1st, 1993. And the Leafs scored on a tip-in by Nikolai Borshevsky, who actually was hurt in Game 2, but came back for Game 7, which was amazing. But this was the first time Toronto actually won a playoff series against Detroit since 1964. Wow. And another weird fact that Wiki's telling me is until 2009, this was the last Western Conference playoff series to be entirely within the Eastern time zone. Because, there's a Central time zone, which is 1 hour behind Toronto time. Mountain is 2 hours behind Pacific, 3 hours. Wow, I did not know that. Over to the spike, Vancouver had a chance to do well. They won the division in 92-93 and would take on Winnipeg. Vancouver came back from 3-1 down against the Jets. Man, what a common theme for the Jets/Coyotes. In the 92 playoffs, Vancouver won in 6 games. Greg Adams was the hero sending the Jets home in Game 6 at Winnipeg Arena. So basically, the Canucks did their job. Teemu Selanne did okay for Winnipeg. And then Calgary, the number 2 team in the fight, took on the number 3 LA Kings and faced each other. The Kings and Flames had a really high-scoring game series. 3 of the 6 games, the winning team scored 9 goals. The Flames won Game 2, 9-4. The Kings won Game 5, 9-4. And won Game 6, 9-6. Holy smokes. In fact, Barry Melrose did a weird thing. Down 2-1, he decided to put Rob Stauber in the net. It wasn't Kelly Rudy who was in net for the whole series, for the season, for playoffs for LA. It was Rob Stauber. So anyway, LA took care of Calgary. In the conference semi/division finals, the Habs winner, Montreal took on Buffalo. Montreal was 3-2 in playoff series with Buffalo up to that point. But Montreal won the series with 3 overtime games. Who can forget Denny Savard's pass to fellow Quebecer Guy Carbonneau in Game 2 of the Stanley Cup of that series? Game 3 was actually, people thought it was Patrice Brisebois' goal, but it was actually credited later on to Gilbert Dion, my catcher. And then Game 4 was Kirk Muller. It was amazing and all that. However, Buffalo lost momentum as Alex Mogilny, who was the guy who scored 76 goals in the regular season, actually had 7 goals in 7 playoff games, broke his leg. Basically, Montreal took advantage of that. This was amazing. And all that, Montreal winning. In the Patrick Division Finals, everyone thought Pittsburgh was going to roll over the Islanders, and we would see Lemieux versus Waugh. All that. The Islanders were 2-0 in playoff series against the Penguins in their history, 81-82, but who cares? But the Islanders hung with the Penguins. Penguins had a 3-2 series lead, but lost Game 6 at the Nassau Coliseum to force Game 7 at the Civic Arena. Pittsburgh could have won at home and all that. But the problem was Darius Kasparaitis was a huge role for the Islanders, basically neutralizing Lemieux and Yager with big hits and all that. Kind of cheap-ass play to get on Lemieux, and partially led to Lemieux's retirement in 94. Well, we took the season off. Worst of all for Pittsburgh was that the New York Islanders had a 2-goal lead late in Game 7 and actually blew it. So Pittsburgh had momentum, but unfortunately a ill-advised pinch by Ulf Samuelsson set the Islanders on a 2-1. Ferraro and Volek? Someone. I don't know who was with Folek on the 2-on-1, but David Folek, who basically was a pathetic skater, scored his second goal of the game and one of the biggest overtime winners in New York Islander history, and that's saying a lot. It was amazing. David Folek had subbed the two-time defending Stanley Cup champions and sent Al Arbor, who was still coaching with the Islanders at that time, to the conference finals against Montreal. Amazing. What's funny about it is the Islanders would not win a playoff series until 2016 after that. So anyway, the North Division had Toronto versus St. Louis. It was obviously going to be Toronto, right? In a sense. But anyway, the series was basically the goaltending. Potvin and Cujo both played fantastic and all that. St. Louis was really outshot throughout the series, and Toronto should have taken them down in less than 7, but Cujo saved the day. Game 7 was the first Game 7 to be played at Maple Leaf Gardens since Game 7 of the 64 Stanley Cup Finals. Unfortunately for Cujo, it was one game he would rather forget, as he lost 6-0. Vancouver was set to take on LA and maybe have a Canucks Leafs conference final 1 year before it actually happened. In fact, this was the first Smythe final since 1982 not to have either Calgary or Edmonton. So basically, Alberta was shut down in the Smythe division time. Everyone thought that Vancouver was going to take it to LA. It was a tight series. Through the first 4 games, it was 2-2, but Gary Shuchek scored in double overtime to win Game 5. And then Game 6, the Kings won on home turf. It was like, how about that? So this was amazing that you got yourself LA versus Toronto and Montreal versus the New York Islanders. So the Wales Conference Final, you got the Habs and the Islanders. 4th playoff series between these two teams. Montreal was 2-1 in that regard, with the Islanders winning the 84 Conference Finals, being the most recent meeting at that time. Montreal won the first 3 games, as I said. Well, they won 2 games in overtime. Again, putting that to 8, if memory serves me right, which tied the Islanders of 1980 for most overtime wins in a single full season. So anyway, that tied the record with 11 straight wins. Montreal lost Game 4, but then they won Game 5 on home ice to get the trip to the Stanley Cup Finals. No, that's 7. Why did I say 3 and 3? Oh, wait a minute. But the Leafs Kings Conference Final was huge and all that. Toronto actually won 2 playoff series against the Kings in the 1970s, which is amazing. Toronto hadn't been to the Final Four or the Stanley Cup semis in 15 years. LA last played in the Stanley Cup semifinals in 1969, so that was 24 years. So anyway, Marty McSorley made a big hit on Doug Gilmour late in Game 1 when the Leafs had the game in hand. Wendell Clark didn't take any guff and decided to go after McSorley. And Pat Burns tried to get at Barry Melrose and all that. But McSorley got lots of death threats and all that. So anyway, there was a lot of bad blood between the Kings and Gilmour because Gilmour broke Sandstrom's arm and all that. Toronto would then take a 3-2 series leading into the Great Western Forum thanks to Glenn Anderson's overtime goal in Game 5. So all the Leafs needed to do was win Game 6 in LA and get themselves to the Stanley Cup Finals against Montreal, who were waiting on whoever won the conference final. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Even though Wendell Clark was a hero, getting a hat trick in that game, the Leafs ended up losing. Well, we all know what happened because of one Carey frickin' Fraser, if you ask me. Like, why didn't he call any penalty on Gretzky? They said, okay, it may have been a 5-minute penalty. Ice-taking penalties in the 90s at that time resulted in a 5-minute major and a game misconduct. However, Gretzky was not penalized. Gretzky should have been penalized at least 2 minutes. That would have neutralized the Kings. And even if the Kings did win the game in overtime after that, fair enough. But worst of all, Gretzky scored in overtime, getting the non-call and forcing a Game 7. No big deal. The Leafs had home ice advantage. Unfortunately, though, Toronto also had fatigue as every game they played had been every other day. Playoff schedules were a lot more tighter in the 90s than they are now. Worst of all, Gretzky basically scored a hat trick to give the Kings a big 5-4 win and their first finals berth ever in history. Gretzky said that Game 7 was the greatest game he ever played. Yeah, right. So anyway, yeah, that was just pure bad luck and all that. And in fact, before 2020, this was the last time the Leafs had only lost one Game 7 on home ice, and that was that. But we all know about 2021, sorry. But we all know what happened this year. So anyway. It was on to the Stanley Cup Finals, Kings and Habs. Kings crushed the Habs and were almost on their way to a 2-0 series lead on Montreal Forum ice when Jacques Demers decided to gamble and tried to get Martin McSorley's stick measured. And thankfully for Demers, it was illegal. So he got McSorley and the stick put in the penalty box. Desjardins scored to tie the game, and then less than a minute into overtime in Game 2, Desjardins did it again. That's the 8th Montreal win of the postseason when they get to overtime. They would add number 9 and 10 at the Great Western Forum, with John LeClair scoring both goals. And yes, John LeClair was a Montreal Canadian. People forget about that. But, of course, Game 5 wasn't even close. 4-1 was the score. All that. So it was amazing and all that. It was weird how, Montreal and LA somehow kept getting to the playoffs and all that. Patrick Roy, my idol, got to the Stanley Cup. Got the Conn Smythe Trophy too. So anyway, here's who got their names on the Stanley Cup. Centers for Montreal: Guy Harbinot, Paul DiPietro, Denny Savard, Vinny Damphousse. Man, it's going to be good for Denny Savard to get a Stanley Cup. Jesse Boulanger and Stéphane Lebeau. Wingers: Kirk Mullin, Mike Keane, John LeClair, Benoit Brunet, Brian Bellows. Yeah, he was a Habitant. Gary Leeman. Well, that might have stung a little bit for the Leafs. I mean, they traded Leeman to Calgary in the Gilmore trade, but then Calgary traded Leeman to Montreal for Skrudland. Ed Roden, Mario Robage, Todd Ewing, who was a goon who sadly is RIP, and Gilbert Dion, Kitchener, of course. Defenseman: Rob Ramage, ugh. The guy who freaking killed Keith Magnuson. And Leaf fans were upset that their captain of the late 80s got a Stanley Cup after leaving the Leafs. Kevin Haller, Lyle Oderline, Matthew Schneider, Eric Desjardins, Donald DeFruz, Sean Hill, Patrice Brisebois, and J.J. Dandino. Goalies were Patrick Roy and Andre Vesico. Jesse Boulanger didn't really qualify to get his name on the cup. Even he played 19 regular season games and 9 playoff games, but he didn't play in the finals. Oleg Petrov played a playoff game for the Habs, but he was left off the cup. Anyway, yeah. Now, there was a riot in Montreal and all that, but because it was a joyous riot. But unfortunately, it cost $2.5 million in damages and all that. So, yeah, that was bad. Not as bad as Vancouver's 2 Stanley Cup riots in 94 and 2011 after losing the Stanley Cup and all that. Yeah. So, yeah, Montreal winning the Stanley Cup. It was a massive time to be a Habs fan and all that. Think about it. But, of course, Canada keeps searching for that elusive Stanley Cup. What can you do? Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.